This tutorial of a beaded bouquet has been especially requested by Sue, a lovely lady from the wonderful Paddock Wood Jewellery Group, who attend regular workshops with me. So I'm going to show you various techniques that I use in these bouquet brooches, but there are so many variations that you can create to put in these bouquets, and I often actually put them onto the front of cards for special occasions. We're going to make something a bit, something similar to this, I think, with this style of beaded flower and these leaves. And this will give you the general idea of how to put this sort of thing together. Now you can buy these lapel pins that can be wired into the bouquet, so that's one way of fixing it, or you can buy this sort of brooch finding that can be wired to the back, so you can either have something long or the smaller version. It really is dependent on the size of the beaded bouquet or posy that you're making, and also the weight of it, so it doesn't sort of tilt forward. So I'm also going to show you various little samples that have come out of my, I keep them from when I make wedding jewellery, and I'm hoping this will also give you extra inspiration. So these are sort of ideas for leaf shapes. Sometimes I use 0.8mm wire to make the outer leaf shape and bead in between, or I use 0.4mm wire and twist it and thread little seed beads onto it. And you can see these various shapes would be ideal within a bouquet. Also, you can use 20 gauge 0.8mm and make something that is just wire and hammer it, and that will go very well inside the bunch or bouquet that you're going to make. Beaded flowers obviously are going to look great, so you can, here's a larger version so you can see how it's done. It's loops and loops of beads, 5 loops of beads and then one central bead. You can scale that up, you can scale it down depending on the size of the seed beads. Or you can just use one larger central bead and then smaller beads around the outside. This is on 0.4 or a longer teardrop bead to encircle. So there's just so many ways of doing this depending on the beads that you have in your stash. So I always encourage you to, just look in your stash. If you just have single pearls, just wire those or put 3 together to create one unit. This was with the twisted wire, twisted stems. So these are great really so this style now, that is this sort of teardrop pearl that is drilled at the top end, and you can make those into petals. Obviously that's much heavier and bigger, but all these things come from the type of sort of styles of tiaras that or wedding jewelry I do, but they're all perfect for this type of project. So if you don't want to use beads, just use wire. And here we go with just shapes. Shapes made out of 0.8mm wire. Now I've done those daisies already in a project. I've done hearts, I've done spirals. So you'll find all sorts of inspiration already on my channel to make some of these wire shapes. So just experiment and create whatever comes into your imagination. So really, with this project, anything goes. You're just going to create a bunch of lovely bits to put together. So this wiggle, I've wired those beads into it, or I've just done half a bead with little seed beads around it. You could just encircle one bead as well. So really, any wires will do, from 0.4 doubled up to 0.6mm to 0.8. But we're going to start with something simple like this, little beaded flower. So what you do is cut about, I would say about 7 inches of This is 0.4 millimeter wire, so about 180 millimeters, 18 centimeters, and start feeding on your seed beads. And then you want to cross the wires over, so you're working with the center. You've got all those beads in the center. Bring them around into a little beaded circle and check that the bead that you want to place at the center is going to fit within that loop. I think I've got too many beads, so I'll just take a couple off. So now where I make my beaded circle, I'm going to take one of the wires and cross it over the center gap. And now I'll feed on the central bead, push it into that circle of beads so it creates the center of the flower. And then where the wire falls on the opposite side, I bring the end around the loop of wire, pull it through, and that secures it at the opposite end. And then I'm going to bring it down the back, along the back of the bead, back to the opposite side, and start twisting the beads. And if I keep both of those wires, stem wires, in a V shape and hold it and twist the other end, the bead end, I get this lovely twisted stem. So you carry on for the whole stem, and then you can just hold the end with your pliers to straighten it up. And even though you've got a wire at the back of the bead, you can just tweak that to tighten it. You won't see that from the front because it's going to be sitting as a brooch against your lapel. So you can make lots of these little beaded flowers. Any shape of bead will do, as long as you can encircle it with the smaller beads. So now for the leaves, it's very similar. Again, 0.4 millimeter wire, and you're just going to be threading and threading. I think I used about 14 to 16 of these seed beads. So you just feed them on. It's really dependent on how big you want the leaves to be, and that is also dependent on how big your beads are, the size of your beads. So again, you cross over just like you did the flowers to make a loop of beads. And then again, I'm bringing the wire across the center, and I'm just squeezing it to a point because that's the point at the tip of the leaf. I'm going to grip it and bring it over the top and back down to meet the wire at the opposite end. And this time there's no bead in the center. And then keep those two wires in a V shape, twist the leaf end until I get my stem, and make sure those two wires are sitting as one strand together, because that's the sort of middle vein of your leaf. So that's one way of doing the center part of the leaf, or the leaf shape. The other way I sometimes do it is, which might be easier for some of you, is again make that beaded loop, twist it together as a stem. So you go all the way along for your stem. So then you just got your beaded loop. Get your flat nose pliers right at the end just to get it to be a bit more straight or even. Shape your leaf. Just do that with your hands. You'll never get it perfect unless it's bigger. It's when it's this small, it's difficult. It's more the color of it. And then get another piece of 0.4 millimeter wire, a shorter length. Go to the very top point of the leaf, double the wire over, and then create a twisted wire with those two by twisting them both together. So you've got those wires twisted together as a stem. And this is quite nice because you've got a sort of a twisted stem in the middle of your leaf, because then you're going to bring it down through the center of the leaf and then just wire it round the base of the leaf, cut off the excess and just squish and make sure there's no spiky ends. And so that gives you the stem in the middle, but it's twisted. So there's not much difference to either of them. You can decide which one is easiest to make for yourself. It's got a very similar look, hasn't it? And then there's this type of flower where it's completely beaded. So that's slightly bigger flower. So you're going to make each petal. So decide how big you want the petals of your flower to be. And this time you've got a much longer length of 0.4 millimeter wire, because you've got to work 5 petals along it. And then you're going to make the little petal loops, leaving a tail end there. And then you're going to pick up again the same amount of seed beads that you picked up the first time for the first loop. I'm using, it depends on the beads. And sometimes with seed beads, if they're handmade, they're a bit uneven. Some are bigger than others. So, you know, I'm using about 12 to 14 for each petal. So then grip it next to the other petal, twist a couple of times to leave a little gap, then pick up another loop of beads. So again, you just keep picking up your beads and creating loop after loop. And I would say that 5 loops is enough for this. So again, I'm coming up to my last loop. You don't want to watch me do the whole thing. And twist 2 or 3 times. So now I've got all my petals, my beaded petals. I've got that little short end left. You can either choose to use that to thread your middle bead on. I'm just opening up my petals a bit because they got a bit squished. Now I'm going to use my short end just to bind around the center. That really makes my flower a lot more solid, because you know the wire is so fine, it reinforces and secures everything at the center. It just makes the whole thing, strengthens the whole framework. So when it feels you know that I've bound enough, I don't want to make it too bulky, cut that off, and now I'm ready to put a center bead. So I've got this long stalk, and I'm going to pick up whatever I want to put in the center, feed that on. Now I do, stupidly, I've chosen rather a big bead, but this is just for the tutorial. If you have a big bead like this, you have to leave a gap or just a little bit more wire on each side, because otherwise you're going to see the bead hole sitting right on the top. And then you can thread it through around and back. It's a bit like sewing, isn't it? And then back around the back of the flower frame, and then just make sure that bead is sitting sort of upright, and then take the rest of the wire a little bit and go around that bead like you would if you were sewing on a button, and then bring the wire again to the back of the flower. So that's roughly it. You can see how you could make these beaded flowers. They're very decorative, great for cards as well. And now to put everything together. So I've got a few flowers here. So what you can do is twist a few of these together so that they are held together in one stem. So you just grip them. This time I'm not twisting the actual flowers, I'm twisting the stems. So they're all held in one piece. I've got a bit too much wire, so I'm just going to snip a bit off. So they're going to be in the bouquet. So I'm just reinforcing that twist. You don't ever want to over twist because it will get too brittle and could break the stems. So be cautious about over twisting using your tools. Then I've got all these other little pieces like the leaves and the little bud flowers. It doesn't really matter at this point how you arrange it because they're all going to be squished. You can arrange them later because they're on wires, so you can pull them out and it will be just like arranging flowers in a vase. Now that's sticky tape. So that's masking tape. You can use a slither of painter's tape, masking tape, whatever you've got to hand. It just helps grip all the stems in one sort of solid, stem together. And then if you've got very long ends like I have, trim them because I don't want the brooch to be too sort of long, otherwise it'll topple over. So now I'm using 0.8 of a millimeter wire. So this is 20 gauge. And I need to see if I can make a circle that will fit through. I'm going to make a coil that will fit through all my stems. So I'm going to curl it just like I would make jump rings. So I'm bringing the wire around and around and around on the same part of my round nose pliers to create an even coil. So this bit of the coil needs to be long enough to cover that masking tape. I don't want to see that masking tape. That's going to be hidden inside. And then after that, I can start curling the wire a little bit higher up on the tool, on the more tapered part of the tool, so it can get a bit narrower. You see how it's sort of tapered. And then I leave a little bit of projecting wire, just over an inch. So that's the holder for my stems. Now, if you're going to put one of these long lapel pins in, I would have taped that in at this stage. And the lapel pin goes in with the stems. But I'm actually going to wire a brooch pin on this one because I want to show you how that's done. So place that coil, or rather place the stems through the gap of the coil and then tighten. It's like crimping. Tighten the very, very top of that coil, the wire on the top coil. Just squish it really tight around all those stems, that bunch of stems. And that's going to help grip everything in place so that that coil can't slide or slide off. And then just make sure that everything's sitting in the middle of the coil. So that's really held in place now. I can't, take that off. And then this excess wire means that I can also secure it tightly by binding it around the end of those stems. So it can be very, very tight at that point. So I think I'm going to stop there. That's enough binding. Cut that off. And then I'm just going to really squeeze the end down so that there's no spiky end. So now the bouquet is really well held in place in my little coil holder. I'm just going to trim off because I don't want lots of long stems. And all I do with the tiny ends, I could trim them off completely and then you'll see nothing in there. But I find that if I just put little circles with all the ends, it just gives a little finish. But alternatively, trim it right up to the tip of the coil, and then you could just add a blob of glue and that will give it a proper finish. So that's one way of doing it. This is, I suppose, I quite like doing this because it means that nothing can fall out. It's sort of, they're just squished in place at that point. So once that's all in your little coil holder, this has all become a mess because I've been squishing it, and I'm not worried about it yet because I want to put the brooch finding on before I start doing my flower arranging. So select your brooch finding, the one that is most suitable. That's too big, so I'm going for the small one. Open up the end. This one just needs straightening out a bit, and then I would already fix my 0.4 wire that I'm going to bind it on with onto the brooch finding. So I'm putting the wire ready onto it so it's securely wired on. So now I'm left with the two projecting ends ready to wire this on to the brooch. So you decide on the back of the brooch, and you want to have your pin at the top end. So you're going to take the top wire, be careful you don't poke yourself, you can always put something on the pin so you don't, the end of the pin, and now wire that tightly a couple of times around just where the top of the coil is, around all the stems, and then come back through the top hole of the brooch finding. So that's gripped on now, and then again the second one exactly the same around the coil and then back through one of the holes of the brooch finding. So that is now secure. You can do it one more time if you're a bit worried. The nice thing about having the coil is this thin wire can, you know, just bind into the gap of the coil. So if you want to do that a couple of times to be extra sure that it's secure, by all means. And basically you want to end up with the wires finishing up at the back, because you do want it to be strong because it's got to hold the weight of the beads, the beaded flowers. And then I bring the two ends together and twist them into one stem, and that means that you haven't got two spiky ends somewhere. So I'm going to just twist that, then cut off the excess in the end, but I'll just wind that just under the base of the brooch just to get rid of it, just make it disappear. See, I'm pushing it to go. I'm closing the pin a bit because I don't want to be poked with the end of that pin. So I'm just pushing it so that it sits underneath, making it disappear really. These are always the most difficult things are these finishing touches, because you don't want to overdo the binding, otherwise you'll see it from the front. So it's trying to make it sort of disappear in the back. So now we've got the best bit of the whole project, because you can now do your flower arranging. So now you can spend your time moving everything around into a better position, readjusting it all. And if there are some pieces that are too long, you can pick up your pliers and create little sort of wavy curves to shorten them. Or if it feels a bit loose, bind 2 or 3 pieces together so they're more stabilized. And you can see, you just put a little sort of curve into the stalks and stems to give them a little bit more shape and life. So anyway, I'll leave you the lovely job of doing your own flower arranging of your own bouquet brooch. I hope, Sue, that you've enjoyed this tutorial, and the rest of the gang, Paddock Wood gang, and I hope you have a go at making your own bouquet brooch and have fun with the design. So there you go. Thank you so much for watching and for requesting the tutorial. Bye for now.